Hi, this is the second video that I'm doing regarding my chemotherapy journey. And in this video, I want to talk about sleeping. So, firstly, your sleep will be disrupted by the treatments that you're going to have. There's no two ways about it. So, it's learning to think about sleep in a different way. I kind of saw it as a game of two halves. I'd go to bed about 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and I would sleep till about 2 o'clock in the morning, and then I would be wide awake. And I would be awake until maybe 4, 5 o'clock, maybe even 6 o'clock, and then I would be able to sleep again from about sort of 5:30, 6 o'clock until about 10 o'clock. So see it as a game of two halves. And when you do wake up in that middle time, then I always saw that as an opportunity to practice some deep breathing and to meditate. So what I really want you to know is that sleep is so incredibly important. This is when the body can do most of its healing. There's a reason why the body will put somebody that's seriously ill into a coma, and that's because it can't cope with all of the thought processes that have to go on in a person that is awake. So sleeping is a kind of like a form of a coma. It's making it so that you are resting, you're not having lots of thoughts, you're not moving about, you're not giving the body other things to do, and that's the time when it can renew and revitalize and refresh. And if you can't sleep, then lying down and relaxing is almost as good. But it is the restorative sleep that you want. Um, so when you do wake up, and if you're not having steroids on these days, more about steroids later. If this is just a normal time when you wake up in the night, then don't pick up any smart device. Don't pick up your phone because that's a different light and a different activity that your brain goes into. So if you do go on your phone and your iPod, what you're doing is you're basically rewarding your brain with a dopamine hit. So dopamine is like a neurotransmitter, and it makes you feel good. So our brains are designed to release dopamine when we do something that meets a survival need. So like eating, having sex. Countless studies have shown that phone activity causes the release of dopamine in our brains. So it kind of makes us feel motivated and happy, and you'd think that that would be a good thing, but unfortunately, it's not a good thing because it causes us to keep on doing it. And if we pick up our phones when we wake up in the middle of the night, our brain will start to deliberately wake us up in the middle of the night, and then we will always be having broken sleep. And it basically will prevent us from healing as effectively as we can do. So it's really important you learn to prioritize sleep. And for many of us, that really does mean going back to a bedtime routine and retraining yourself into a sleep. So if you've been a parent, you'll know that you have to train your baby into sleep and for sleeping for longer. And that's what you're probably going to have to do as an adult, because unfortunately in the West, we've got really good at thinking it's really clever to burn the candle at both ends. Um, I was an insomniac for many years when I was teaching full time. I was teaching in Leeds, but I learned a long time ago to do things that would help induce sleep. So I used essential oils like vetiver, lavender. I would have dim lights, and I would have my lovely candlelit baths. So in terms of sleeping, I'm going to talk about the reason I chose to have a portacath, really. I mean, everyone is different, and every one of us will have a different journey, and we'll all have different symptoms, and we'll all have different reactions. But I found the portacath was invariable, And if for no other reason than it was because it enabled me to still have a long candlelit bath. And this helped me to feel like not much had changed initially. So my baths in the evening were kind of like my healing sanctuary. Um, and of course, the portacath, although it is an invasive surgery, it's an invasive procedure initially because you do have to have it in an operating room under local anaesthetic. Um, but it does make life a lot easier because what would happen is that my chemotherapy came through my port, but also I could have my bloods taken for the various blood tests that you have doing, and it just meant that I didn't have to keep having cannulas or something like a PICC line that needed constant work on, like cleaning it and things. Um, so I found that it was a lot easier, and I found that the butterfly clip that they put on over the top of your port just meant that having the chemo was just a lot easier as far as I was concerned. So one of the things I would suggest is that you ask your hospital if they would fit a portacath. I had mine fitted in December, ready for my January, and for me it was the best thing. And as I say, it just meant that I didn't have to be careful about water getting on the site. I could just have a nice bath in the evening. So try to get into a bedtime routine as soon as you can. So try to do that prior to your chemotherapy starting. I know it seems counterintuitive that you get a cancer diagnosis and then you've got to try and sleep, when actually what's happening is your head's going 10 to the dozen and you feel like you're a rabbit in headlights. But this is also a good reason why you can start practicing a bedtime routine. So try things like sleepy tea. I use the Yogi bedtime tea. Deep breathing, deep abdominal breathing, slowing down the breathing. Um, if you can have baths and you have a bath, then they're really great, especially if you put like some Epsom salts in, and be careful of adding essential oils. There's a lot of essential oils that will actually burn your skin, so it's always probably better to buy things like Epsom salts that have already got the essential oils added, so that you're not putting too much on. Um, have dim lights, avoid smart screens at least an hour before you go to bed. Instead of watching TV, read a book. Guaranteed. If I read a book, I only get a couple of pages and then I'm falling asleep anyway. Or just listen to some nice gentle music. I put on, I was lucky, my sister got me this. It's a sweet sleep from Sweet Bee Organics, and it's a magnesium butter. And this, you just put like a grape size amount on the soles of your feet and also on the calves of your legs. And this was great because not only did I tell myself that it would help me to sleep, but I actually think it did help me to sleep. It certainly was a lot calming. And on the nights when I would forget to put it on, I would often feel my legs cramping up a little bit. So I found that it really did help to prevent the leg cramps as well. Um, Going to the steroids, when you're on chemotherapy, you have to take steroids for about 3 days. Now, when you take those steroids, that kind of rules out sleep, really. But what I found was that by using the Sweet Bee magnesium butter, once the steroids had got out of my system, it got me back into sleeping for longer and getting me back into the sleeping patterns more quickly. It's expensive. It's about £25 a tub, but it does last a really long time. And maybe if you've got some friends that could, if friends say, "What can I do for you?" you could say, "Yeah, get me a tub of magnesium butter. So yeah, it's really good. And then after I put the sweet bee magnesium butter on the soles of my feet, I would then put on some bed socks, which later became compression socks to help with neuropathy. And I'm going to talk about neuropathy in a later video. So let's talk about the steroids, okay? So you have to take steroids for around 3 days whilst you're having the chemotherapy. And these steroids will make you wake up early. So you will struggle to go to sleep on those days, and you will wake up at 3-4 o'clock. Um, the Bowel Babe, I think, would often do the Macarena. I think she said when she was waking up with the steroids. So try not to fight it, but equally, hopefully, you can rest later in the day. Now, I hope you are not having to go through this whilst also trying to maintain a job or looking after children. I knew that luckily for me, I'm currently not working because we've just moved back to the UK, and also my daughter is a student in Manchester, so I'm not having to run around after a small child. If you are having to do that, I'm so sorry. It's tough enough, but it'd be even tougher with the children. So I'm sorry you're going through this and having to be um, an active mum as well. But if that's the case, maybe you could see if somebody could help you, a friend, a mum, grandma, anything, to help look after the children so that you can get some rest. Maybe for an hour or so. I found that the days 4 and 5 after chemotherapy were often my worst days, so they might be the days that you could maybe try and get someone to help you entertain and look after children. Now, when I woke really early, when I woke at like sort of 4 o'clock in the morning, that's when I would take my first lot of steroids, because you have to take 2 lots. And if you take them too late in the day, then it is definitely going to disrupt your sleep. So what I found was that the first time I'd wake up at like 4 o'clock in the morning, I would take my steroids, and then I'd take my second dose of steroids at lunchtime. And that meant that invariably by 9:30, 10 o'clock, I was more than happy to go to bed, and then I would cope with waking up at 4 o'clock. So what I did with the steroids was that I would take up some healthy snacks, like a couple of walnuts, a couple of satsumas, and then I would make sure that I would have those with the steroids. So always, always, always have some food with your steroids. No one told me that. So right at the very beginning, I would find that I would get a little bit of indigestion until my friend AJ said, you make sure you're taking them with food. So take your steroids with food. The timings of my taking them did mean that I was able to go to bed at a reasonable time in the evening. Now, a lot of people, when they get indigestion, assume that it's because they've got high stomach acid, so they immediately turn to things like Gaviscon. For me, my indigestion is always about not having enough stomach acid. And so what I've learned is that if I take a couple of dessert spoons, tablespoons of apple cider vinegar in a small amount of water, then that would alleviate my condition. So it's quite a good way of seeing which you are. Basically take some apple cider vinegar in some water, and if your gut starts to calm down within about 20 minutes, then you'll know that it's about not having enough stomach acid. But the indigestion, if it's not treated, can become quite um, unbearable, really. So do make sure you try one or the other to either counteract high stomach acid or not enough stomach acid. I had a diffuser in my bedroom at night, and I also had one in the lounge, and I would put 4 drops of obus oil and 4 drops of Four Thieves oil. Now, I used the Four Thieves oil when I was in my teaching practice because, as probably a lot of you might have gathered, schools are breeding grounds for germs, and there's all sorts of germs that come into the classroom or into my room where I worked one-on-one with children. So I would put the Four Thieves oil on. Now, the Four Thieves oil comes from the time of the plague. So apparently, when all the spice ships were docked in and around the areas of London and the ports of the UK, they were kind of embargoed. They were not allowed to go anywhere because they were locked down in effect. But they were locked down without any means of being able to get any money or to get any food. So what happened was that they used spices and put them on nose rags, and by covering their noses and mouths, they would then a group of these entrepreneurial thieves, shall we say, would go into the houses of the plagued and rob them, take the silver. In order to be able to help them to eat and to sustain themselves whilst they were confined to their boats. And they never got the plague. And so when they were caught, the king said, "Tell me the recipe of what you're putting on your nose rags, because you're not getting the plague. And if you don't tell us the recipe, then you will be hung, drawn, and quartered." Um, so a couple of the thieves wouldn't tell the recipe and were hung, drawn, and quartered, and 4 of them said what the recipe was. So things like cloves and I can't remember all of the ingredients. I used to make it myself. So I think it's cinnamon and clove and eucalyptus, lemon and rosemary. Um, and they were the. So I used to make my own blend up, but actually, if you go, you can get so long as you're getting pure essential oil and not any kind of blended rubbish. You can get this Four Thieves oil, and they've actually done some scientific research on it and have discovered that Four Thieves oil will take up to 98% of airborne germs out of the room. So I knew my husband was going to have to go to work and go out to work. Um, and so by having it in a diffuser in the lounge and also having it in the bedroom, I felt that I was doing what I could to remove any airborne bacteria. I felt it was making the flat a nice, safe place um, for me. So I think the oils are okay on the whole, but do check if you've got asthma, and do check if you've got any pets, because not all essential oils are good around pets. But you know what? Personally, I think this is your time, and it's important for you to prioritise what works for you. I did make sure that I kind of went into my own little lockdown. I did not want to risk any kind of infection, and I certainly didn't want to risk getting sepsis. So that's why I just shut myself away for 5 months, really. Um, the other thing I used was Happy Nose balm. I used to use this with my daughter when she was a baby, and she'd get a blocked up nose. And it's just a little it's a little balm that you can put in your nose. Now, when you lose all your hair, you lose all of your hair, and your nose hair obviously does an important job. And I didn't know this until I didn't have nose hair, and then would find my nose would just drip at any time. So always have a little packet of tissues with you. And But the Happiness nose, at night I would put the balm up my nose, because as the nose dried out during the night, you could get these little shards, these little bloody shards of blood and membrane. I don't know. And they can completely block up your nose if you're not careful. But I never had that, because I think the diffusing of the oils and the Happiness balm helped me to sleep. So sleep is really, really important, and those are some of the things that I did to ensure I got as good a night as I could. And sending love and light to you. If you're on this journey too, you'll get there. Take one day at a time.